All right, so today we are going to break down the really provocative thesis of retired Army Colonel Douglas Macgregor. He's making a huge argument that the fundamental rules of war have changed. And those changes, well, they have some shocking consequences for global power, for the economy, and maybe even for the survival of entire nations.
So let's start with this quote, because it's pretty much the key to everything Macgregor is saying. It's not just about ships, you see. It's really a metaphor for this new age of warfare, where being big and visible, being what we used to think of as strong, has actually become a fatal weakness. In his view, the more powerful you look, the bigger a target you are. And that one idea, well, it changes everything. Okay, so let's start on the battlefield. Macgregor's central military point is that a technological revolution has just completely flipped the script on the relationship between an attacker and a defender. He claims that for the foreseeable future, the defense now has a massive advantage over the offense.
And at the very heart of this new defensive power is something he calls the ISR strike complex. Now, what is that? Well, think of it as this all-seeing network. You've got sensors everywhere, from satellites way up in space to sonar down on the seabed, and they're all connected directly to precision weapons. The new rule of the game is brutally simple. If you can be seen, you can be hit, and it can happen almost instantly.
For Macgregor, the perfect real-world example of this is what's happened in Ukraine. He argues that after some initial stumbles, Russia set up this deep strategic defense that was powered by its ISR network. And this system allowed them to just absorb and systematically chew up attacking forces, basically proving that his idea of massing your troops for a big traditional offensive, well, that's now a recipe for absolute disaster.
Okay, so this see and hit capability isn't just for land battles. Take it out to sea, and the stakes get even higher. I mean, if the ISR strike complex makes any visible thing a target, what does that mean for a multi-billion-dollar aircraft carrier? To Macgregor, the answer is painfully simple. It's a giant floating bullseye.
And wow, the contrast he paints here is just stark. He looks at these huge surface fleets as these incredibly expensive tools for, as he puts it, meddling in other people's affairs. But in a real major war, they're just targets. So what's the true dominant force on the waves? Submarines. They operate completely unseen, which makes them the ultimate weapon in an age of total surveillance. He argues they've been the decisive weapon for decades. We're just now being forced to admit it.
And this brings us to a country like Iran. Macgregor's point is that nations that can't afford massive fleets have actually adapted to this new reality much faster. He claims Iran played it smart. They didn't invest in big, expensive carriers. Instead, they poured their money into their own ISR strike complex, a whole web of surveillance and long-range missiles designed specifically to neutralize the very naval power the U.S. depends on.
So you have this new military reality, right? Well, Macgregor argues it has absolutely devastating consequences for the economy. Because when you apply this see and hit capability to a critical global choke point, the entire world economy can basically be held hostage.
I mean, just look at this number. Macgregor cites a 640% spike in shipping insurance rates just to go through the Strait of Hormuz. And this isn't some theory about the future. It's an immediate financial shockwave. The threat alone, before a single shot is even fired in a big conflict, starts to paralyze global trade.
And this is why that matters so much. Look at this chart. You're talking about the economic engines of Asia, Japan, South Korea, China, India, and their critical dependency on the oil that flows through that strait. A full closure doesn't just hurt them a little bit. He argues it would trigger a global economic meltdown.
And Macgregor says this isn't some future problem. It's happening right now. He's talking about thousands of ships just sitting idle. He points out that key industries in places like India, think about ceramics or tires, which need petroleum products, are already starting to shut down. This isn't just about gas for your car. It's about the fundamental building blocks of modern industry.
Okay, and this is where Macgregor's argument gets really unconventional. He calls it competitive collapse. He argues that the ultimate battle isn't fought with missiles or tanks anymore. It's fought with societal resilience. In this new era, victory doesn't go to the strongest military. It goes to the nation that can withstand the pressure and avoid completely collapsing from the inside out. And this quote, man, this is probably his most jarring claim, and it's the absolute core of his competitive collapse theory. What he's really arguing here is that a nation's internal divisions, its social fabric, its political fractures, are now a much bigger vulnerability than any army at its borders.
So let's break down what he means by that with this table. He contrasts Iran, which he views as this ancient 2,700-year-old civilization with incredibly deep roots, with modern Israel, which he portrays as a more fragile state, an artificial construct facing immense internal pressures. He points to things like civil unrest and reports of citizens actually leaving the country as signs of this deep internal weakness.
So what does winning even look like in this kind of situation? Well, according to Macgregor, it's totally lopsided. For a country like Iran to win, all it has to do is survive, just not collapse. But for a superpower like the US to win, he argues, it has to achieve the total societal disintegration of Iran. That's a vastly more difficult and maybe even impossible goal. All right, so for this final section, let's pull all these threads together. The new rules of warfare, the economic chaos, the societal fragility, and see how Macgregor uses them to paint a really bleak picture for any major US military action in the region.
He boils it down to a simple, hard fact of geography. The United States is not a land power in the Eastern Hemisphere, and that creates logistical nightmares. Any kind of conflict means thousands of miles of vulnerable supply lines, massive aerial refueling operations, and a reliance on distant bases, all of which are prime targets in this new age of warfare.
On top of all that, Macgregor argues that Western powers are just getting completely outplayed on the strategic chessboard. He sees what Russia is doing in Ukraine as less of a tactical land grab and more of a grand strategy to, in his words, bleed Europe dry, to destroy its industrial base and its economic strength for the long haul.
And that brings the risk right back home. This is a huge warning from him. He says that when you get into a conflict like this, especially one that goes badly, you're not just risking a military defeat, you're risking bringing down your own fragile institutions by destroying public trust. He even suggests that if the US had just stayed out of it, Iran's theocratic government might have actually collapsed on its own from all the internal pressure.
And he points to numbers like these as proof. He sees a deep, dangerous disconnect. When governments push for wars that a huge majority of the population, we're talking 70–80%, is against, he says that creates a crisis of legitimacy. People stop believing that their institutions actually represent them, and he sees that as a profound danger to the country itself.
So at the end of the day, Macgregor's entire analysis really boils down to this one very unsettling question. He paints this picture of a domino effect, where a military mistake based on old rules kicks off an economic crisis, which then starts to unravel the very fabric of society back home. And it really makes you wonder, what does happen when a nation's institutions lose the trust of their people and blunder into a war that nobody wants? It's a sobering thought for sure.